Hello there. On behalf of the Ancient Tree Forum, welcome to the first in a series of webinars on the VetCert standards for practicing level. My name is Vicky Bengtson and I was the project manager for the VetCert project, and I'm also a trustee of the Ancient Tree Forum. The aim with these webinars is to help you gain an understanding of what is expected of you when you become a certified veteran tree specialist. I'll walk you through each of the units in the standard and help you identify if you have the required skills and knowledge, or if you have any gaps. We will also provide resources at the end of each of the webinars where you can find out more information and fill any knowledge gaps yourself if needs be. Our aim is that you'll feel encouraged to go on and take the VetCert exams. Each session will cover one or two of the 12 units and they've been pre-recorded. The webinars will be complemented by periodical live question and answer sessions. I'd therefore encourage you to write down any questions as you go along, any things you're wondering about, and we can pick those up at the live sessions. So what is VetCert? Well, hopefully by now you'll be familiar with it because you've signed up to these webinars, but it was an EU Erasmus project which ran from 2016 to 2019, and it developed a pan-European certification scheme for managing veteran trees. There were 10 partners and 7 countries. It's aimed at 2 levels, practicing and consulting tree professionals. And VetCert builds on the EU Vet Tree project, which was its predecessor. Vet Tree focused on training and ensuring that we built up knowledge and skills at that level, and then VetCert actually offers you the opportunity to prove that you have those skills and knowledge. So these series of webinars will walk you through the VetCert standards. So they're not a training course, they're rather to help you understand what is expected of you when you take a VetCert exam. So the webinars are set up in much the same way. This first one, I will also run through briefly what the different sessions will cover, but I'll also cover the terms. There are a number of key terms in the standard that we've used consecutively through each of the different units, and I'll go through each of those kind of about what's expected of you by those particular words. You'll understand more what I mean when we get to that point. Then each of the webinars will focus on 1 or 2 units in more detail. So they're going to be spread out. This first session is covering Unit 1, and then there will be 2, 3. Some of the sessions cover 2 units, as you can see, and those are the shorter units in the standard. The longest unit is Unit 11, which is about veteran tree management, and that's the one we'll cover last. So key terms in the standard, you'll see and recognise if you've read it, show an awareness. So that means that that's a basic understanding of the particular topic. If we provide an overview, we would expect you to be able to describe the full range of factors relating to that particular item. Demonstrate an understanding, then we're able to show that you understand the factors in a specific situation. So it's not just being able to repeat these things off pat, it's about actually showing that you understand the detail and the background to it. We use the word detail, and that means give full information, what about the particular thing. Discuss, that might be where you actually talk about it a bit more broadly. So there are some examples of that as we go through that we'll pick up, but you take into account different issues or ideas. It's perhaps some of those topics that are less clear-cut. Describe, that's similar to detail, but we would expect you to give an account in words to describe something. Explain, why or how. Identify, then we would want you to actually point something out or be able to specifically identify something, whether that's a species or a tree or bark or something. Then we quite often talk about evaluate, particularly with the consulting level, but that's where we would be expecting you to kind of identify pros and cons, what's good and bad about a particular point of discussion. So those are the kind of terms that you'll see repeated throughout the standard when you read them, and go back and read through or watch this session again if you're unclear about any of it, and you'll understand the context more as we go through. So I'm now going to dive into the first unit, which is about veteran trees recognition and values. Now, most often veteran trees are actually really easy to spot, and we recognise them, all of us working with them, very easily. This particular unit is about recognising trees in their various forms and their context, and explaining the wide range of values that veteran trees provide. So each of the unit has a headline, and then it's divided into a couple of subsections. And we'll go through each of those subsections in turn, because then there's a number of key knowledge and skills items that we specify under those headings. So the first one, recognise veteran trees in their various forms and their context. So, and the section here is that we would expect you to be able to provide a technical definition for a veteran tree, and that would be specific to the country in which you're working. Now, we know there isn't one single widely accepted definition of a veteran tree across Europe. That just doesn't exist. But we also know that they often share characteristics. So for VetCert, the definitions that are used, or recognition features if you like, is that the trees are old for their species, they're quite often large for their species, and they have complex crown structure or architecture, that they have high biological and ecological values. They may also have high social and cultural values. Hollowing and decay are recurring themes and features. And here's some examples that can look very, very different in different contexts, but still both of these would be covered by our definition of veteran trees. In the UK, it's worth noting that there's a distinction made between ancient trees and veteran trees, and that ancient are just that, very, very old, and the other aspects of that regard to the characteristics that the trees have, where in most other countries that distinction isn't made. And as a VetCert qualified practitioner, you need to be able to show awareness that the definition of a veteran tree might differ in legislation, in official guidance, and also between countries. And understanding that there may be a technical definition which may in fact be different from a legal definition. So why are there differences, and what does this mean for the VetCert professional? So because there isn't a single definition that's valid throughout Europe, and it might even differ within the same country. In the UK, for example, it may be different in Wales and Scotland and England, how at least the legal framework works in relation to these particular trees. And as a VetCert practitioner, you need to be at least aware of these differences and take them into account if there is a legal definition, and particularly if you go and work in a different country. And that was one of the ideas with the VetCert certification scheme, was it would allow people to travel and work in different countries. Another part of this one is to identify veteran trees in the various forms in which they have developed in response to past management and or their environmental conditions. So this is a bit more about being able to read the tree and the landscape in which it sits, and also to be able to identify if changes have taken place in the management and the conditions in which the tree is growing. So a practitioner, you should be able to identify them in the field, and also be able to distinguish between, for example, a tree that's in decline versus a tree that's showing signs of natural retrenchment. That there may be smaller trees that are more tricky to identify. That would be important for a VetCert practitioner to pick up, that spot those particular less obvious trees, if you like. They don't always have to be big, and they don't always have to be tall or large, as we all know. But also understanding the form of the tree is something that we'd expect a VetCert practitioner to know, is that, if it's an open-grown tree, that's got dead branches, it might suggest to you that the tree was once in a more open conditions and is now in a shaded conditions, and the branches have died as a consequence. If it's an old pollard, for example, those sorts of features are some of the things we would expect you to be able to spot. And here's some examples of some old trees which have probably been changed, the environment in which they're growing has changed, that the dead branches suggest that these trees were probably growing more open. Maybe it's an old avenue that's now become overgrown. So using the trees to tell you the story. The second part of this unit is about explaining the wide range of values that veteran trees provide, and we've already mentioned some of those. But the ecological, cultural heritage and social and aesthetic values that these trees provide, and they have a wide range of features, I think, as we're all aware of. The trees in these photographs are from France and they're shredded trees. They're not actually particularly large, not up in the top of the crown anyway, but they have great cultural heritage value and a real part of that particular landscape. They may be linked to traditions or land management in this particular case. They may also be part of a wider ecosystem, part of a big wood pasture or parkland, very high biodiversity values. They may also have aesthetic value, and they may also give an indication of changes over time in fashion. Some of those things that we know from places like Epping Forest, where pollarding was considered to be very ugly and not at all aesthetically pleasing. So having an understanding and being able to describe those different values that veteran trees can provide is important. And here's an avenue, which is one of the kind of classic examples of places where we find veteran trees and where they have lots of different values. There's the aesthetic value of the avenue in its own right. Each of the individual trees may have that high biodiversity value. Then we consider it to be very important for vet cert specialists to be able to communicate with a wide range of audiences on the basis that communication often saves trees, and that we would expect a vet cert practitioner to be able to communicate clearly and correctly about whatever it is in relation to the management they're going to undertake or the values in relation to the particular tree, and also to be able to describe the special management requirements that these trees require, and that will be adapted to the audience that you're talking to, and that you're able to advocate the value of veteran trees to lay persons, landowners and others who you may come into contact with. And as a practitioner, you're often the one who'll be there on site undertaking the work, and that's often when people react. So we see this as a very important skill to be able to talk to people and describe what you're doing. So that's all of the first unit. Then there's a range of resources, and at each of the webinars, the end of the webinar session, we've got a series of slides where we have resources that are available to you, freely available to download or watch online. There's a VetCert fact sheet which covers definitions, and that's one that we've tried to compile with the common features of all the different definitions across Europe. Then there's David Lonsdale's edited book, which has all sorts of information in it, and we'll come back to that several times through the course of these webinars as a very useful source of information. Chapter 1 has the concepts and principles and covers these issues about how to identify these very special trees. Ancient Tree Guide number 4, which was produced in cooperation with the Woodland Trust many years ago now, is actually currently under revision, and that will be updated. So the next webinar we will cover Unit 2, which is about the development and ageing of trees, the role of physiological function and dysfunction. So again, I'd just remind you that write down any comments or questions that you might have in order to bring those with you when the live sessions are booked. Okay, thank you. See you next time.